Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk to you about Dungeons and Dragons. I want to talk to you about Mike Birbiglia's new special, the new one. There are major spoilers for Mike Birbiglia's stand-up special, the new one, on Netflix in this content. And I think Mike Birbiglia's stand-up special, the new one, has a lot to say about Dungeons and Dragons, and I want to explore it with you. Let's go. All right. So Mike Birbiglia, he's a pretty funny comedian. I think I've watched a good amount of his specials. I will now watch them all after I saw the new one. It's absolutely brilliant. So Mike Birbiglia is he is a down in the weeds, let's get it done for realsies stand up, right? Brick wall and a microphone. This guy slays, right? And he talks about it, right? He's a stand-up comedian, and he's been doing it for like 15 years. And he tours the entire country. He goes all over, and he just throws it down, right? And he's one of these guys too that right now when he does a special, he can get a check for $1 million, $5 million. Top dudes in the stand-up game get $20 to $60 million per special now. And they can get that because those specials are sought after by at least 2 streamers now, right? Amazon Prime is buying, Netflix is buying, and even some of the other streamers are like, oh, maybe we put our big girl pants on and be a real streamer and start getting stand-up too, you know? So there's a market for these specials, right? So Mike Birbiglia drops this new special. It's called The New One. And so first of all, if you're a dungeon master, okay, not if you're a game master, because everything you run doesn't matter, right? But if you're a dungeon master and you are actually changing people's lives with your campaign, if that's your goal, right? And if that's not your goal, you got no business here. Go right or go left, and you'll find a D&D commentator that'll applaud you for whatever nonsense you want to put at your table. But I run Dungeons and Dragons to change people's lives, my own and everybody at that table. And I am not happy if any person walks away from that table without growing, learning, or changing, right? And that is the new standard for Dungeons and Dragons, in my humble opinion. Oh, you don't think so? Guess what? Dungeons and Dragons doesn't operate like a game anymore. It is a thing that must be protected because every 40 years, a group of people come to destroy it, right? And the reason why is they all know it's not a game. It doesn't resonate like a game. It doesn't play like a game. It doesn't look like a game. It doesn't act like a game. It doesn't get impact from the culture like a game. It doesn't function as a game, right? It doesn't function as a game. It's an element of Americana. It's a life brand. In my opinion, it's a human improvement engine that was designed by Gary Gygax and given to the world in 1974, right? And he disguised it as a game, in my humble opinion. All right. So Mike Birbiglia comes in, and if you're a dungeon master, you have to watch stand-up. And the reason why is there's this question about human narrative, okay? First we had shamanic tales. Then we had the written word, right? Then we had the big screen and the small screen. Dungeons and Dragons put them all in the dirt. All of those story methods are antiquated, right? And Dungeons and Dragons has become a special narrative vector for people who are charismatic, confident, and intelligent to tell incredibly personal stories or incredibly public stories, right? The stories told at my table are incredibly personal stories, right? The stories told at Matthew Mercer's table are incredibly public stories, right? And Dungeons & Dragons can scale up and do all of that, right? And it changes people, right? And the point is, when we go into Dungeons & Dragons, we can use all the things in Dungeons & Dragons as analogy, and everybody at the table is willing to read 8,000 pages of canon, right? So you're only dealing with the absolute top intellectual elites, right? And so, and within that, and I am hoping that at some point we push this down as this transformative narrative from the top upper crust of the American intellectual elite to intellectual non-elites. That's the best way to say it. Okay, all right. I'm hoping we get there, and I think it'll just like the great President Reagan said, it'll trickle down, baby. There you go. Okay, he was 100% right. We all know that now because Biden is the quintessential Democrat, and he is the most sad sack coward president we've ever had. And I think everybody understands that we can never have a Democrat president for like another 10 to 20 years, because we came 5 inches away from being on the edge of World War III, and everything cost double, and everybody wondered if their kids would ever own a house. Right? It's like a mild apocalypse. That's that term belongs to King Waspinator. He's the first person I ever heard use it, and it is the most spot on description of where we are, right? A mild apocalypse. All right, okay. So but stand-up has become this form of narrative where philosophy occurs, right? And that's what you really got to pay attention to it if you're a dungeon master, because Mike Birbiglia just did an amazing stand-up special that I laughed at nonstop. But all he did was talk about his life and fatherhood and motherhood and poetry. Not a joke. It's exactly what he did, right? And that's what we do, right? Like when we sit down to the Dungeons & Dragons table, if we're not some sad sack game master running OSC or Pathfinder or some nonsense game that is literally a shield to growing and changing, and that, I think that's where we've arrived, right? That's what OSC, DCC, and Pathfinder are. They're a shield that people pick up when they realize that if they continue to play Dungeons & Dragons, they cannot remain unchanged. They will be fundamentally changed forever. I think that's what those games are, right? And that's what just happened recently. Dungeons & Dragons was like, hey, things are going to change. And people are like, I don't want change. Why don't I clutch to the company that gave me no change before, which was Paizo, right? Didn't they just copy 3rd edition? Wait, I'm starting to think that, that if I choose to play Dungeons & Dragons, first of all, people have told me that I'm not allowed to, so there might be a cost to it. Why don't I go play a game that there's never a cost to play, because there's never any change, which is Pathfinder. Let's do it again, right? We already had a whole bunch of copy energy in 2008. Let's repeat it, right? Like, and let me protect myself from changing or growing or learning again. And that's what Pathfinder is. It's a prophylactic to changing or learning or growing. And it is used by the most sad sack, desperate people who do not wish to improve. Pathfinder is a repugnant game, in my humble opinion. And I'll tell you right now, and everybody's like, Scott, why can't everybody just play what they want? We're past it, man. We had this not me saying it, Professor Dungeon Master said in January of 2023, there is a battle for the soul of D&D. And he's right? D&D is something that's battled over. Not my words. That's Professor Dungeon Master, right? And so, it's incredible. It is truly incredible, right? So Mike Birbiglia gets out, right? And he drops this special. And it's called The New One. And he walks you through his life. Now, what's interesting is he does make you laugh through, every 5 minutes you'll have a laugh out loud moment, right? And what's really shocking is he talks about how he met this woman and he fell in love with her, and he decided he wanted to marry her, right? Well, he told her, I do not ever want a child. I do not ever, and he says in the thing, he was very clear with the woman, I do not want a child. And she's like, okay, let's get married, right? Now here's the issue, right? The moment they get married, he goes with his wife to his brother and they have a kid. And his wife is like, hey, I would like a kid. And he's like, hey, I was super clear. I don't want a kid, right? And she's like, I do want a kid. And now they have, and this is the issue, right? Dungeons & Dragons said, hey, we're going to share the Dungeons & Dragons with you. Then when OGL 1.1 comes out, and it's like, hey, we don't want to share as much with you, right? And now the two communities, so Mike Birbiglia and his wife, right? They went into this marriage both agreeing that they didn't want kids, right? Now the wife wants a kid and Mike Birbiglia doesn't, right? Who loves each other more? And what was their response? Mike Birbiglia is like, I love you. You're my wife. We're going to have a kid. Done. Right? But he didn't want it. Right? And that was his response. Dungeons & Dragons was like, hey, we want to change the OGL. And the OSR was like, we want to end you. We're going to reach back 40 years take their exact words of D&D Be Gone and shout them again, right? So that everybody who was put in front of a bonfire in 1983 can be re-traumatized when they're put in front of a digital bonfire in 2023. We're going to use the terror of 1983 to echo and force Hasbro's hand in 2023. And that's what happens, right? And now there's all these revisionists, right? Mastering Dungeons, Ginny D, Nerd Immersion, telling the story like D&D Be Gone wasn't in there. And like Hasbro responded to advocacy and not threat. It is the worst revisionism. It is the absolute worst revisionism, right? So Mike Birbiglia says flat out, I didn't want a kid, right? But his wife did, right? His wife then said, what we're going to do is we're going to have a kid, and it's not going to change your life, right? And what ends up happening is Mike Birbiglia's life is changed in every possible way. There's not a vestige of his life that remains. Everything is changed, right? And his love for his wife, he continues forward, and he very reluctantly goes into fatherhood, right? Now the reality is, what's interesting is he is using narrative and art and his platform to share fundamental truths about himself. And when he's done with this special, he has changed, and I think I was changed, right? It made me think differently about my fatherhood, right? One of the things is I wanted kids. I wanted my kids, right? Mike Birbiglia's kid is going to know that his father did not want them. That's deep, right? That is an incredibly deep and sorrowful purpose, right? However, one of the things is Mike Birbiglia's, I think his overall point is that he sucks as a person and his wife is more than enough to build a family around, and that he essentially is bringing what he can to the party of a family, and that his wife is carrying the rest, is fulfilling every other need, because her passionate love for their child is enough to fulfill, right? It's a really, really fascinating look at fatherhood, motherhood, poetry, narrative, laughter, and meaning, right? And the reality is, because it's crafted for everyone, it still hits. It still has some cultural impact, right? But the reality is, when you see this, right, and you look at what Mike Birbiglia has accomplished with an hour and a half of stand-up, with an hour and 20 minutes of stand-up, and it's long, right? You're like, you look and you're like, I have a 12-session campaign coming up, and I'm going to run those for 2 hours apiece. That's 24 hours with myself and with 4 people. And I can change everything. I can fix half the problems they have. I can fundamentally change their emotions on a multitude of topics, right? I can share a part of myself. I can discover parts of these people that I never knew existed. I will be changed. They will be changed, right? And what it says is, art is not static, right? Art is not unimportant. Literature is not unimportant. Dungeon mastering is everything. We can do 10 times what Mike Birbiglia accomplished in the new ones with our next campaign alone. And then we can get a new group of 4 people and transform their lives, right? It is astounding, and all of it exists. Every bit of it exists because of the power of Gary Gygax slamming his fist into the earth, cracking human narrative forever in 1974. And then Lorraine Williams coming and slamming her fist into the ground in 1986 and saying, I am creating a new foundation, and I will fix every problem you created, and I will carry Dungeons & Dragons to a new place. And then Lorraine handing it off to Ryan Dancy, and him saying, I will share Dungeons & Dragons with the world. And then him handing it off to Robert Heinzu, who bobbled it for 6 years and came extremely close to dropping the crystal goose and it shattering. And then on the last bobble, Mike Merle's picking it up, saving it, right? And then handing it off to Christopher Perkins, who carries it to this day and is now holding it with one hand, and the other hand is extended to Amanda Heyman. That's where we're at, right? Get your work done. Change lives.